Welcome back to the Space Salvi Institute podcast. I'm Andrew Petiprin with Bobby Mixa. Bobby, it has been a while. We had a little bit of an unintended hiatus.
Yeah, a little bit. I was in Chicago last week, unexpectedly, but it was such a pleasure to be back home. So
Back home in Chicago, and now you're
back
back to
back in
your
Krakow, yeah. And I have to say, I was thinking of our interview with Mikhail Diamant the whole time because, I walked along the river walk, took in the architecture of Chicago, and I have to say, still, Chicago is my city. I still love that place, despite the postmodern architecture. And I actually found myself, though, walking to the Wrigley Building instead of Tribune Tower. So I was thinking Mikhail Diamant would appreciate that. So still, it's nice that the center, at least for me, the center of the place are those traditional buildings.
well, your brief return home is timely because our guest today is in Chicago, and we're determined, aren't we, Bobby? Well, you're in Poland, but I'm determined we're going to save the world from the Central Time Zone. So we have a guest with us who's in Chicago, and we're really excited to be talking to her. Our guest is Kathleen Carr, who was connected to us by one of our former guests and our friend Billy Newton. And we're just really delighted to get a chance to talk to Kathleen Carr today. Kathleen is founder and president of the Catholic Art Institute in Chicago, a painter, a classically trained painter in her own right, and I'm sure somebody who can talk to us about all kinds of interesting things on top of all of that. So Kathleen, welcome. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Wonderful to be on. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're so glad to be talking to you. We thought we'd just start finding out a little bit more about the Catholic Art Institute. We both, Bobby and I, have both been kind of poking around on your website, and I know Bobby knew a bit about the Institute even before we came in contact with you directly. But I wonder if you could just tell us about how you found what was, how it came to be, and what is it?
Well, I had reached out, this is years ago when I was taking my sacred art paintings around to do some marketing and selling of prints. And I ended up in Chicago at the Catholic Marketing Network, and they had supported something called the Catholic Writers Guild. And they allowed the writers to come and use some of their space. And so when I inquired with the president of the Catholic Marketing Network if they had an organization for artists, he said they didn't, but he received a lot of encouragement and interest. And so he said, if you want to try to found one yourself, you could bring the artists to the, to the Catholic Marketing Network conference. You could use our conference rooms. You could have a show. I would help you promote it with Al Cresta. And so I thought this was a little bit out there, but I decided to do some research, and lo and behold, I started laying the groundwork for it. I reached out to other organizations and see what had worked and what hadn't. I had lived experience at this point as a web designer in major media. I had also worked for a university, the Corcoran College of Art and Design. So I had administrative skills and the painting background that really helped inform what the needs are of an artist. And then the things that I was not seeing in the Catholic Church that I think needed to be there, really a more focus on beauty and arts, in terms of education and evangelization. So that's really how this started. And so that year, the marketing network happened to be in Chicago. And at this point, I had written a vision document. I had always envisioned that we would be able to have mass together and pray together. I felt that was a very important part of trying to address the fact that beauty is really so denigrated in the culture and sadly a little absent in our modern church. So I wanted to have a place where there was a beautiful liturgy, beautiful church, more classically oriented. And that's where I met the Canons Regular of St. John Cantius, because I'm from Washington, D.C. So I had come from Washington, D.C. to Chicago. And so when I was there with my art, I met Father Joshua and I spoke to him about what I was working on to found this, and they expressed interest in partnering. And that's how this started and ended up growing out of St. John Cantius Parish, which really is providential because of their charism, which is the restoration of liturgy, music, and art. And so they're an order of men that are dedicated, praying. Their whole mission is this idea of restoration, and in particular, liturgy, music, and art. And so we're a lay apostolate that is supporting that portion of it, which I just think is very powerful and important to what it is that we do. So, hopefully that's not too long-winded, but that's really how this started to, be founded.
Yeah, if I could just follow up, because I know there are all different ways that we want to talk about art, but one piece of it is sacred art and what is connected to the worship of God in the liturgy. And so I know that that's one thing that you do, or that you promote, or that you're interested in at your institute. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I would say that just overall, we're working in three areas of endeavor. There are things that are needed on the part of artists, like community. I think there's, in general, for the clergy, for the lay, and even for artists themselves, there's education, philosophy, theology, things that are connected to this. Why should a church building be beautiful? Why should it be ornamented? Why should it take a certain shape? And so when I've hosted architects to discuss this, I'm trying to place a focus on this to encourage younger clergy, if they're going to be doing renovation projects, that really theologically it's more correct to have a church that is, vertical rather than horizontal. That is, the church in the round is really, it's a man-centered, and it's a very horizontal thing, where the more traditional churches, they raise the hearts and minds to God. They're a vision of heaven. It's the Domus Dei. And so the arts are where we also, as the lay who are donating and building new churches, but the artists themselves are offering the best for the greater glory of God. And so through those arts, especially when they frame the Mass, it's very powerful to evangelization. And so that's another component of what this organization is about. So it's community, it's education, it's evangelization through beauty and the arts, and all of what to support. And so because there's certain needs in all of these areas, those are the things that we do to address it. So community building events. I mean, I've worked in the arts my entire adult life, and I can tell you how woke the community can be and hostile to the faith, and you feel very unable to be who you are, if you're in a secular setting like that in the arts. And so this is a place where you can be welcomed and find community and support and camaraderie, fellowship, all the rest of it. So that's a component too. So it's like,
Yeah, evangelization and bringing people, like, for example, to your local parish. And there's always kind of an element of embarrassment when you bring them to the church and there's nothing really beautiful in there. So perhaps maybe, because I know you have a little bit of a background, in also knowing about the history of the Art Guild. So how did it, happen that today we just have so few? I mean, there's a revival happening now, it seems, through, groups like your own group and many other liturgical art groups that are finding artists, but it is so rare. How did that happen?
why did everything get so ugly? This is part of my journey with this organization, because as an artist and a sensitive person, to beauty and aesthetics, and as a designer, I mean, I worked for National Geographic, which were major places in DC. So, I know what looks professional and good and all the rest of it. And when it's not there, you do ask yourself, why is everything so bad? And it is, embarrassing. Suppose you have a friend that isn't in the church and you want to bring them. I can tell you the power of bringing them to St. John Cantius versus a place where they don't put anything into their music program. You maybe have somebody that has, not very good voice, but they're volunteering. This is really not a good approach. But to your point, like, why did this happen? Well, it's really the modernist mentality that kind of grew out of the Bauhaus. I mean, the people that were doing this were they're breaking from tradition. So this is sort of the underpinnings of modernism. It is whatever was done that was ordered and beautiful in the past is passé. It's been done before. We are going to do something very new and original and break from that. And so there's really kind of a hostility towards it. And then you have the new. And this is where you get the new modern architecture and, all of those movements that happen, brutalism, the Bauhaus movement, you know, everything to where you get the international style, which now is just glass boxes on steel frames and things like that. But that's really where it grew from, and then it found its way into the church. And theologically, I think too there was, I would say, maybe an over focus on we can just preach this, and the other externals are nice to have, but they really aren't important. They don't matter.
Mhm.
So I think there can be a utilitarianism too that's gotten into well, first of all, it's definitely in the culture, and it's also gotten into the church. Once again, that, it doesn't matter. God is here present in the Eucharist, and that is absolutely true. But the signs and externals where we're honoring and welcoming him and making him present in his house, and also communicating to the faithful that are attending Mass that something very miraculous is happening. The church should be communicating this. The sanctuary should be a special and beautiful place. It's a reflection of heaven because heaven and earth are meeting on that altar. And so in the absence of those things, I'm afraid that this has been part of the contribution of people not understanding Christ in the true presence. I mean, the signs and externals are not there. And when the whole environment gets too man-centered and too horizontal and too casual, and let's meet everybody where they are, and cups of coffee and this kind of, something that is serious and holy that is taking place is starting to get watered down and lost in that mentality. And so when the arts are depleted there, I think too, the idea that the faith is true, good, and beautiful, you start to lose that it's true and good because you've pulled down the beauty. And those are the three that are always together, those three transcendentals. So that's really, what happened. And so I grew up, in the late 70s and 80s, and, it just didn't get any more beige in terms of the beige Catholicism that they talk about. And my parents grew up and met in Washington, D.C. at the Franciscan Monastery, and it's a really beautiful place. We're having our retreat in June there.
Oh.
But they used to take us down, but we went to a parish that was built in the 60s in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And all of the churches, there were, many churches within 5 minutes drive. And every one of them, they're so ugly, it's a race to the bottom, which one is the ugliest? And as a sensitive person, I just remember really just wanting to be at that monastery and just having this pull and attraction to the older, beautiful, church architecture and that mysticism that you would sense, but you're so young. It's, you're Mass every week and the church is just ugly and somebody's singing through their nose and, and then you get the teen Mass and that kind of stuff where it seems like, why is the church trying to run after the culture and be cool? And it's just not. You start to lose people. Like, do you really believe that this is true? When you're trying to be Duran Duran, like, no, like, and we have this wonderful patrimony of sacred music, and, so many people aren't familiar with it. I was in choir as a child, so that's where I started to learn Handel's Messiah and various other things. So I was very blessed and lucky. And I had, it's something that I'm attracted to, things that are like higher that way, but. And then when I ended up at St. John Cantius, and they do the Mass so beautifully, whether it is the new Mass or the old Mass. But that's where I encountered all the Latin and the simple chant and learned all of that. And it's just, I think it's something that is so moving to people. And I've seen the stories that happen there of the power of the beauty in the Mass that they've put in. And I've had so many young people come and be involved with the Catholic Art Institute who converted, and it was because of the beauty that really drew them in. So anyway, sorry, that's
No, it's amazing though that it's that so many though people my age, I think, are seeking to learn the traditional the traditional the tradition. I mean, basically the tradition of art. And so it's great to see institutes such as your own trying to increase awareness of that. Because I don't know, like many people, like we were talking to a couple architects and also urban planners, and so few know about programs that are out there. So to have something that actually would enhance the awareness of that and also educate people into the theology and philosophy of this is so important, because I think most people, even when they go to mass, they learn from the actual the building. I mean, from the actual architecture. And so you don't get conveyed there like, okay, well, what this is about. And Heavenly Jerusalem doesn't seem to be much of an icon of that. So just by having the actual like beauty around you, but in a particular form that is the proper icon of it, it actually teaches. Just as we know, people learned the Mass, learned basics of the faith from even being, illiterate themselves. So this is so important.
Well, they do call the church building a sermon in stones, a sermon in
Hmm.
stones. So what you're saying is exactly right. And the Mass itself is important. That, when I found the older liturgy, and what I saw there was interesting, was what I was seeing in my parents' home videos. So in the streets of Washington, D.C., there was Eucharistic processions, and there were First Holy Communion, and the cassocks, and the Berettas, and the whole nine yards. And I remember asking my father, what happened to this beautiful world? I was so enchanted, and it seems to have disappeared until I found more, traditional liturgy, and St. John Cantius, and it was like walking into my parents' home videos. But then I love the fact that there was that connection of, prayers that my parents and grandparents, all the way back have said, and you could go anywhere in the world and you could follow along in the parts of the Mass, that are in the Latin. Um, yeah. Also, the church has said, there's an older phrase, lex orlandi, lex credendi, lex vivendi. So what I'm doing with this organization again is I'm focusing on the liturgy, and when it is, not impoverished, it's really teaching the faithful. It's prayer, it's cult, So it's the cult that forms culture. So culture comes down from the way that you pray. So, that lex orlandi, lex credendi, the law of praying. So how you pray informs how you believe, and this changes how you live. And so if the Mass is really impoverished, we're going to have faithful that don't understand and believe the way that they could. It deforms in a certain sense, you could say, and so once again, this is why we have these talks that talk about the church shape and design and theology of it. Why would you have the sanctuary separated from the area of the faithful? And why does a church take a certain design and have certain ornamentation? And so we talk about that, and various other things, coming from many disciplines. And so, we've hosted really great speakers. Sir James McMillan came and spoke on sacred music. Music is extremely powerful to move the hearts and minds. We've had some, the best really architects, Sir, James McCreary, Duncan Stroik, Ethan Anthony, he's from Cram and Ferguson, on and on. Many artists that have come and can talk about their experiences where you go through a school. This is another part of my interest in starting this organization, is what happens when you go to art college and you start getting indoctrinated, and there's all this pressure put on a young artist to be original, and really what they're trying to get you to do is to be as novel as you can. And then there's just a competition that happens with artists to be original. And what ends up happening, and we can see now, is just this degradation of culture. It's very hostile to beauty. The modern art shows are full of things that are nihilistic, I mean, satanic, some of it, if you've seen what goes on. And most people are not interested. You ask somebody, have you been to a modern art gallery? And the answer, of course, is no. Why? Because it's piles of trash on the floor with all of this ridiculous explanation of what it is, and chin stroking people, and it's a pile of trash. I mean, but
Mhm.
the emperor has no clothes, but this is what you have going on in, So it's in the institutions, of course, all of higher learning. And with this also was a lot of skills that went out the window. So I was taught by people that couldn't draw themselves. How are they going to teach me the classical method? And so I ended up getting classically trained afterward. Most artists that are in art college, they have a lot of natural ability, and so did I. And you can really get yourself pretty far with your natural ability. But the difference between what happened in art college and with classical training is when you make a comparison to being an athlete and then your coach is Pele, you're trying to study soccer, well, you're going to really learn to perfect your game studying with a master. And that's really what classical training looks like. And then there's just, you know, techniques and things that you go through in order to learn that. I'm sorry, I know I veered off there a little bit. You are talking to an artist, but you know.
Oh no, this is all right up our alley, and very much in sympathy with other conversations that we've had and things we've written and stuff that we're doing at the Space Alvey Institute as well. We talk a lot about the state of art, Christian art, Catholic art, and something that I always think about. Well, I'll say this first. I mean, we say pretty unabashedly we believe that Christian culture, Christian civilization has produced the greatest art in the history of the world. And so, it's such a funny state that we're in now, where we're sort of left to accept these, this kind of mediocre substitute, where we have to say things like, well, we know it's kind of quaint, but aren't there nice positive messages to get from it, or something like that? Whereas like if you stand in front of the Pietà in Rome, no one in the world would ever say, well, it's kind of quaint, but I mean, it's, look, I mean, it conveys something nice or something. I mean, it's absurd. It's ludicrous, right? I mean, we believe that, the greatest truth should be expressed in the greatest, by the greatest art, right? So it's all, it's all well and good that like some of us are really rising up and saying, look, we don't want to accept ugliness anymore. We don't want to accept mediocrity anymore. But as you were beginning to say, and I'd just love to hear a little bit more about that, we need to figure out a way to, we need to figure out ways to teach people the techniques to make this stuff come alive again, and not feel ashamed about it, not feel like, well, we're just, being antiquarian, but we're not. We're actually, we want to rediscover this stuff because it's just as good now as it was then.
That's right. And we're not copying the past. I mean, if you are an artist working today, in the realm of realism, but particularly sacred art and architecture, you're not copying the past. Duncan Stroik couched it as we're not copying, we are making grandchildren. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to express it. And that's essentially what all of those, those of us today are doing. We're speaking in a language that's, that's beautiful and communicates the truth. And but you can always take it in, and it's going to come out, in your own voice, your own hand, with your own lines, each individual artist. There really just needs to be support for it. This is really the biggest challenge, and why we do see such a loss of beauty. It needs to be supported. The church used to put so much behind the arts, but they had great patronage. Some of the popes, you had some of the Medicis, but then, even earlier church buildings like St. John Cantius, that was built with the Polish community, and they all donated a month's salary. Now, I know that sounds like, a lot to do, but that's really how that church came to be. There was a sacrifice that was made, and the community pulled together, and by everybody's, dollars and dimes, they built something lasting and beautiful that is still nourishing those of us today. And I think that we need to get back to that. It's just hard to make people understand the value of it, because again, we have sort of this, we're awash in this utilitarianism.
Yeah.
It's a nice to have, that's for rich people. Or you get sort of this, new kind of atheistic thinking to a certain degree of, look at all that gold, it's ridiculous. We could just be feeding the poor. Well, we are giving this to God, number one, but we are feeding the poor, because rich or poor, everybody can go into a beautiful church building and be brought into the presence of God. And maybe they can't go home to a very nice house like other people, but it's for them, but it's also for God. We can't forget that. We give the best to God. This is his house and he is being made present there. We shouldn't be cheap about it. Cheap, tacky catalog, curtain looking vestments, just the cheapest statues that are bought out of a catalog that have no character. It's this is wrong-headed. And when we're generous with God, he will outdo us in generosity. So I
Hmm.
think that that's a really, I can tell you, I mean, just keeping going in this organization is very, very challenging, trying to reach people, make them understand. People love it, I'm so moved, I learned so much, but sometimes that doesn't translate into, I have to keep going and I need help and support too. And so when you were talking about skill building, yeah, so that's another thing that we do is we host workshops in traditional art making techniques, because they're not available to you in a larger university setting. So you want to learn tempera painting, they don't offer it. You want to build a triptych, well, maybe you could cut up some wood, but they wouldn't be able to teach you how to do the gilding and the estufado or the gesso molding, all the various things. And so this is another thing that we try to do to host artists that are masters in this and that can help share this with a new generation of artists so we don't lose it. So we've had courses in medieval illumination and classical drawing and painting and things like that. So we're doing the best we can. I wish I could do more, but I can only do with, what's coming in and so.
Well, it seems to me that you hear so much about the need to educate kids in the trades these days. And I say that that's perhaps not related to art, but just having this kind of like skill with your hands is something that is not emphasized enough in contemporary education. And I'm thinking about, you mentioned St. John Cantius and the Poles who built the church. On my flight to Chicago, there were so few options for something that I could watch that was good. And they had the first episode of The Sopranos, and I've never seen The Sopranos before, so I watched it. But at the very end, Tony Soprano goes into this beautiful church, and he just sits in there, and he says to his daughter, he says, our ancestors built this place. He said, and his uncle, who's like one of the mobsters, he says, my dad and him, they built this place. They came from Italy. They knew how to do it, and they built it. I was thinking the same thing about my ancestors who came to Chicago. They actually had this skill. They grew up just having to make things themselves, and they were able to take the design, however it was, and then build it. So it seems to me that I'm hoping that with this re-emphasis on actually learning the trades again, because you hear okay, we need to educate kids in the trades, and perhaps maybe with this need for beauty to fight this ugliness, people will just start actually building beautiful things again. I know it sounds maybe like a stretch, but it's always shocking to me that the people who built the heavenly churches in Chicago, really making Chicago in some ways like a heavenly city, as there's a book that actually has that title. But it wasn't done by people with PhDs, but it was done just by people who knew how to do things with their hands and following a design that they experienced in Europe. And perhaps maybe this maybe is actually lines up with what we're doing and what you're doing is. I'm convinced that when people come to Europe, it's like you see these things. I mean, I'm not saying that the American stuff is second rate, but I kind of am some in a way, because when you see these things, you're like, wow, and you want to bring that back home. It's like, why don't we have this here? So
well, because
yeah,
they built everything long before modernism
long before, yes.
A newer country, sadly. I took a semester in Florence, and so there I was
Okay.
just completely spoiled with everything, the architecture, the beauty, the art. What a great experience that was. So I'm with you. I'm sorry I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No, no, no. And I'm sorry. I keep on going on these long tangents, but I'm seeing in Europe too, they have these like, they actually specialize in the trades at a young age. They don't put everybody through this 4 kind of years of, like 4 years of like the generic high school, and say off you go. But they actually at a young age, they train people. Now, are they building beautiful churches in Poland right now? Like, in my opinion, no. So, but perhaps maybe there would be some that this maybe there's something that may revitalize this. There's more and more places that seem to be popping up more recently that are like I'm thinking about you have Notre Dame Architecture School. You have a number of these other places around the country that are actually teaching these the classical methods.
Benedictine College
Yeah.
and then James McCreary founded a traditional architecture program at Catholic University. So there are three places where, especially for the architecture, you can get very good instruction. And that is an area that's growing, thanks be to God. So ecclesiastical and just otherwise, there is more of an interest and a hunger for more classical designs, And I think the other ray of hope is of the young clergy, they're very traditional, more, traditional minded. I don't know if you saw that recent article that was talking about, the younger clergy and the older clergy. I don't know if it was AP or if it was the study through Catholic University, I forget, but they had polled, I think it was a Catholic, they had polled, I don't know how many, large sampling of priests and who's liberal, who isn't, as if liberal is such a thing. We're not a political organization. You're Catholic or you're not, believe the faith, and you just don't get to do that. But anyway, what they found was that the clergy that are, younger, newly ordained in formation, they're more interested in the tradition. They're more interested in, the old evangelization, so shall we say, which you get a lot of this buzzwords going on in the church, new evangelization. I'm all for it, but what is that? I mean, what I know is powerful is the old evangelization, give people
Absolutely.
reverence and beauty, in the highest and best way that you can. And that is, you're honoring God, you're doing what the church has done. You can make new compositions that are like Tallis and Bird and Palestrina. I mean, this is happening today, but these are the things that are moving people and are powerful. And I have seen it. I can tell you the most incredible stories of these young kids coming in from Art Institute of Chicago into St. John Cantius. One person I knew was raised to really be hostile towards the faith, very indoctrinated upbringing. And the mass just moved her and she just started weeping. It was the beauty. And what happened is it just opened her up to, I know I've been taught everything, all of this propaganda against the church, but she wanted to then explore. I can't get away from the beauty. I can't get away with how much this is moving and it's communicating something to me that I want to dig deeper. And within about a year and a half, she was baptized and received into the church, and so some of these kids dabbling in the occult. I mean, the conversion stories are incredible. And so then also it's no surprise that there are a lot of vocations that come through, places that focus on this and put the right people in the right places. So the arts, the musicians, and then care in terms of the instruments of the mass and just offering that mass as reverently and beautifully as you can. And it's so powerful, and the youth know it. They don't want the Peter, Paul, and Mary mass, the Barney and the dinosaur mass. They want the authentic. You just know instinctively what is reverent and what is moving. As opposed to this jamboree going on, the happy clappy. We're at the holy sacrifice of the mass. This isn't a birthday party. So I think the music, when it sets the proper tone, it's again really powerful. So, I feel like I'm the one that's holding forth here. So, please feel free to interrupt me.
No, that's all terrific. I mean, I ask myself, why would I want to go to that birthday party either? I mean, I don't, it's like we need to lead the way in, yeah, having better art, better music, all those sorts of things, so that then the culture has those things too. Um, and maybe to that end, we could talk for a minute about cinema because I write a lot about movies and we talk a lot about movies, and I know that Barbara Nicolosi is involved in your institute. She wrote a very good movie a couple years ago called Fatima. I really
Hmm.
enjoyed that movie, and she's a great example of somebody who's kind of doing good work in the arts, in the cinematic arts as a Catholic. We just need so much more of that, and it's for the reason that I've begun to kind of elaborate on, which is, okay, it's great to have beautiful churches, and those can have like an incredible evangelistic effect. We should fill them with great paintings and sculptures, and the people who are making those great paintings and sculptures should be making things for other places too, right? But we need things that are just for the culture too, and movies are still, in my opinion, the form of art that is most enjoyed, most accessible, kind of just most ubiquitous for most people. I mean, I happen to think cinema is potentially an extremely important art form. Period.
Hmm.
But anyway, I'm babbling a little bit because I just love talking about cinema. But you are at the institute. You're really trying to support that. You're really trying to engage with cinema and to encourage Catholic cinema, Christian cinema.
Yeah, it will because it's storytelling is so powerful and movies can be very powerful and it doesn't have to be the life of a saint. Simply a very well told story can move people to virtue or the opposite. And our enemies on the other side, they sure are using the genres and the arts in the cinema and television shows to their advantage. And we've ceded way too much ground on this. And so this is why, I think, it's important. So Barbara contacted me and said, I just discovered your organization. I love everything that you're doing. I started an organization in Hollywood called Act One. It was for Christian and Catholic writers. Um, to learn to perfect their craft and learn to communicate better and write better scripts. And because what do we see all too often is these silly low budget, it's not high art, it's not well done, and it's just ridiculous sometimes. It's not doing anything. And so really helping people who have the talent and the heart and the mind to create scripts, and make movies that are, edifying and crafted well. And so we're trying to support that because it is important. And I can think of many shows and movies where it's been very persuasive to make things that are against our faith so normalized and palatable. Think of a show like Will and Grace. What fun, kooky, lovable characters, funny, normalizing a lifestyle that, it's so you think about these things. It's a little drip, drip, drip way that they've influenced the culture to normalize things and what is our answer to this? So yeah, that's part of that. And because Barbara she worked with everybody, out in Hollywood. So on films with Robert De Niro and major stars. And then, she was the consultant for The Passion of the Christ with Mel Gibson. Her Fatima film, she's won awards. She's just worked on many, many projects. She really has an inside perspective and understanding of what the industry is and also what is well-crafted storytelling. And so she's trying to bring that perspective and support that. And so and I want to support it too. Any way that we can use the arts to to change the culture, to inform people, to bolster virtue or inspire it. I'm all for it.
Did I read that you do a film festival or some kind of something like that associated with the Institute?
We started that this year, yeah, because Barbara joined, I guess it was like maybe a year and a half ago or something. And so that's one of the things that we instituted. So we screened it in Washington, D.C. We we got quite a number of great films. And so the winners are on our website. So catholicartinstitute.org/ film festival or short film festival, sorry, the URL, but you can see the winners, one of which is still being screened. And so she's going to give us permission a little later. We'll screen her film at our conference. But the others were, great, really on message. It's all about John Paul II's letter to artists. And so taking an inspiration from that, just being the call to being an artist and anything. So it's pretty open-ended for what the filmmakers can do. So we are going to announce our call for entry soon, hopefully, in the next month or so. We're still working on some sponsorships and things. So, but yeah, it's exciting. It's, nobody else is doing this. There's no other Catholic film festival. And so we were really overwhelmed with the number of entries. We thought, well, we'll get a few, but it's our first year out, but we got quite a few and really high quality, very, very different films. One of them is, I would say, very heartbreaking story of this man who had adopted children from Uganda and met, this young family, gave this girl a cell phone to record her everyday life. And it's so heart-wrenching and moving to see what deep faith she has in the midst of such desperate poverty. Unbelievable. So I would recommend you go on our website and take a look at the films. But the winning film, beautiful. It's about the artist Donnie McManus and his story, and just also talking about a lot of what we've been talking about here, that, working in the traditional arts and that genre is not living in the past. We're bringing all of that and the beauty and supporting it into today and into the church today. So.
Do you find many people who perhaps are not believers, who are not Catholic, even Christian, but have a desire to actually learn, in a way to perfect their skills as an artist and learning these classical forms, perhaps maybe through that process coming to believe? Do you find many people interested in the Institute who are not believers, but are captivated by what is on offer?
Yeah, we do get email from people who are interested or, wanting advice. I think what I've found is when there seems to be an ordering going on interiorly, maybe there hasn't been a full conversion, but there's more of an orientation towards God or towards living a better life. And if you're an artist, you start to abandon that modernism and you start to find yourself gravitating towards this desire to express, something that's beautiful and, tangible and realist looking, So that's one thing that I've seen. And in general, there are some atelier programs that are happening. I think the Mormons have one that's pretty well established, and they're more interested in the arts, but theologically they're just miles from us, and so there can be some differences there that would be problematic. But yeah, I mean, I hear from people that are Catholic and non-Catholic, and so we have the Sacred Art Prize, which is it's a means of jurying and getting an exhibition of high quality work, and you really want to jury something in order to do that. As much as I want to support every single person, really we're looking for a high craftsmanship, and this is what an artist should aspire to, and have the humility to realize I need some more training. Or, maybe I'll never get to that high level, but it's enjoyable. But, you just don't want to hang a show of just everybody just to be nice. It doesn't really help,
Yeah.
The mediocrity is not going to, the church didn't everybody and anybody, they supported and trained, and you studied with masters and went through a guild. And so this is what I'm trying to do. And so with the Sacred Art Prize, the artists, there's cash prize money, which helps them. And then, when we promote it on our website, people have gotten commission work directly. I do whatever I can to just help with that, get their names out there, their work online, their websites. And I try not to intervene because I don't know if you know this, but if you're an artist and you want to show in a gallery, the gallery will take 55% of the sale of that work. And when you're painting in classical, in a realist way, it's not something that you can scribble like Jackson Pollock in 30 minutes. It takes weeks. And so artwork is sold almost more on its size than anything. So somebody can scribble a painting that's, 24 by 18, and I can spend 6 weeks painting something and they would sell for almost the same amount until I would get, famous enough. But that's a lot. So, okay, let's pretend it sells for $5,000. The gallery takes 55% of that. What am I getting for my 6 weeks of work? I would make more money at Starbucks. So this is an issue too. So most people I know that are realist painters have a second side hustle. They teach, they do graphic design, they do, something else. So just, that's, I think I'm talking too much.
When you have people like Jeff Koons, though, taking home these huge $1 million prizes, anyways, and winning.
Well, it's a problem because you said it, $1 million prizes. This is why, I don't mind Marcel Duchamp's paintings or some of the, modernist abstract work. I'm not hostile to it. It just has no business being in the liturgy. Even the Vatican II documents will say it should be of, high quality and something that is intelligible. So it's not that I'm hostile altogether to it, but that side is so funded. Why with what we're trying to do here? No, our focus is more on how the arts can support the faithful, the mass, the liturgy, and honor God in the best way possible. And so that's why, if that disappoints some people, sorry, but I'm not doing that. I mean, the Turner Prize and all these galleries and the Venice Biennial, and there's just huge amounts of money, the National Endowment for the Arts. And what are they funding? It's all of this awful modernist crap, And so it's frustrating because I feel like, I'll be honest with you, like I feel like a little rat that's like treading water, trying to, keep going, with like the little shoestring budget, all up against, it's like David and Goliath. And that's what I'm fighting against. And they have all the money and all the means, and so it's, this is why I say once again, let's find each other in community. Let's support each other in community. And, through that, I think this is where the change is going to be made. And it just seems like that's kind of where things are moving anyway. We're all sort of starting to find ourselves, and it's sort of one or the other, There's the status quo that I think it just needs to go away. The guitar mask, the, hippy dippy, that kind of stuff. And let's get back to the beauty and focus on God and not a kumbaya, hey, I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, that kind of, sort of mentality. I'm going to get in trouble by saying all this stuff, but it's true.
Not with us. Not with us. You're not, Kathleen. So don't worry about that. Thinking about what you were saying before about, Jeff Koons, Marcel Duchamp, all that kind of thing. The thing that strikes me, those are just that's just tip of the iceberg stuff in terms of just what I would call kind of really inhumane modern art. And it seems to me that whether a person's interested in sacred art or liturgy or whatever it may be, it seems like a return to a real humane art is something that a lot of people could probably get behind. And I'm saying all this as a lead up to asking you about your own painting, because your website is really great. We want to point people to it. carfineart.com, I believe, is what it is.
Yes.
And you paint these wonderful portraits, and you describe on your website, you talk about that you paint narrative paintings. So you can see in this kind of like romanticist vein, like kind of people expressing emotion or like embodying certain virtues maybe, or something like that. I love it. I can't get enough of it. And the whole kind of symbolist thing is terrific. It just seems to me, again, like whether people are interested in churchy stuff or not, I can totally imagine somebody checking out your website and thinking like, that's the kind of painting I want to look at. I don't want to go see Marcel Duchamp's urinal. I want to see a painting of a person expressing something. That's really beautiful. So I don't know. That's just my lead up to asking you about your own painting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that's the kind of paintings I want to make, and that's the kind of paintings I'm drawn to, and I think are interesting. And if God has given me a gift, I wanted to try to put beautiful things into the world. And so, you know, they don't have to be just, paintings of biblical scenes and saints, although I started with the saints and the ones I'm most close to. So Saint Joseph and the Sacred Heart and the Immaculate Heart and Saint Mary Magdalene, those were the ones that I began with in terms of the sacred art. And then, but it's just, I also was wanting to get some painting commissions, portrait commissions. And so I painted myself, self-portrait, because I think there's no better calling card. If you can show somebody a painting of yourself, it looks like yourself. It's an interesting take on what a portrait could be. That's helpful. And so, that's sort of what I started doing with my work. And then, just following on from some of the traditions of symbolism in painting, and then more of a narrative story. So, figurative and, things that are surrounding that are sort of telling a story, are things that I'm attracted to and I love. And so, there's just a whole movement. It's a smaller part of the art world. Excuse me. That's the realism. It's a representational area of the art world. It's not well supported. You would never. They wouldn't look twice at me in the Venice Biennial or the Turner Prize and these other things. But the smaller, artists that are doing the realist work, there's been a growing number of organizations and atelier programs. So when I started, when I really discovered this, because this was really bubbling up in the late 90s, or turn of the last century, year 2000 or so, there were about 7, I think, worldwide that were in this tradition that sort of came from the church, this style of teaching, the rigors of it, the drawing, how you draw, and then how you draw into painting and studying with a master, and these things ended up in France and then in the UK, but coming really out of the church. And it's called an atelier. And so this is where I got the classical training. And so there were about 7 of them. Now there's 100 and something worldwide of these. And so but again, with the youth, they seem to really want the authenticity. I think that there's just been so much, lying in the culture, or just a lack of authenticity, that I think that they just aren't buying it anymore. And they really want this, beauty and this training. The only issue with the atelier method is that it doesn't quite give you what you need when it comes to dealing with sacred art. Theologically, I mean, talking about Dennis McNamara, he gave a great talk that's on our YouTube channel that really discusses kind of this theological idealization that you want to have in your figures. They are participating in the divine life, and so there's a certain stillness, and you don't want it to be so particular that it looks like your neighbor or the waiter down the street. Do you know what I mean? And so I think it's a little more successful when you don't have something that is like very overly photorealistic. I mean, theologically, it's just kind of not what you want to do. It starts to look silly. It starts to move itself into the kitsch camp, because what you end up having is a portrait of your friend dressed in a costume, and then you call it Virgin Mary. Well, it's your friend in a costume, and it's too particular that it's hard to even pray in front of, because it's sort of like, I don't know how else to couch it, but it's almost like bad acting, like you've miscast somebody and you're desperately trying to believe them in their acting, and it's not working, And I think if you're sensitive to this, you know what I mean. You'll see this artwork that's, I think, can be out there. It can be very well crafted, But then there's just sort of this overly realistic, and then sometimes a really silly, sugary. There's a sort of a taste level that I think also needs to be considered when you're dealing with the sacred, And I have to say, I have also learned quite a lot from working on these. So from some of those older paintings that I did into how I would approach this now has really been informed and would change. So I don't want people to look at my website and say, well, who does she think she is? So, there are things that I would change and go back and do differently. I just have to say that I just do a lot for this organization. It's a lot of hours. And so my painting has taken a back burner to it because there's just simply so much it's like just exploded, and there's so much work that needs to be done that it's been a little hard to balance that. So I'm hoping to get back to the easel, but that's really also the reality. Because I've got the web design background and administrative, and just because of the fluctuation of sometimes a grant comes through, sometimes it doesn't. And so it's just, we membership, it's like little dollars and cents, and then some some of them are bigger, and, depending, the funding can be a little bit like, riding a wave. And it's so, I just pick up the extra work, and that's kind of what's happened. So just, that's just to lay the cards on the table. That's the reality of all this. But it's, it's a labor of love, and I do what needs to be done, and, and leave it to God. And, this is ultimately his organization. It's his work. And so I'm just a little pencil in his hand, so to speak.
Well, you're being modest. If people go and check out your website, they'll see some really, really wonderful portraits, and we encourage everybody to do that and get inspired to, I don't know, seek out that kind of art for themselves. Bobby, do you have anything further for Kathleen? We're getting to the end of our time.
I'm just so grateful you hit the nail on the head I can't imagine myself praying, to a picture of the Virgin Mary. And so thank goodness there were no cameras around at that time. So it is true. You don't want to have it too particular for a specific individual. There's something about the art that needs to have, if you want to say, eschatological dimension to it.
Yes. Yep. That's exactly right. And I'm trying to help the artists be sensitive to this, because you can have something that's really well crafted. And I've seen this, in the realism world, unbelievably well crafted, marvelous, but it's just the biggest piece of kitsch. And it's so, it's like it's monumentally bad for, what it was trying to do. And just the taste level was not there, So there's so much that goes into it, editing and all that. So,
yeah. Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Our guest today has been Kathleen Carr, who's doing wonderful work at the Chicago-based Catholic Art Institute. You can also check out her website, carfineart.com. Kathleen, we'll be following you, cheering you on, and maybe collaborating, just continuing to kind of be fellow travelers going forward. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I would love that. Can I just plug our upcoming retreat in Washington, D.C. for artists?
Please.
So we have, the two clergy. Barbara Nicolosi she has run retreats. She's presenting. And then Heather King, she's an author. She writes a lot for Magnificat and others. Yeah. So that's 2 days, June 21st and 22nd. And also our conference is going to be at Catholic University this year. So we had an invitation to get there. So this year it won't be in Chicago, but we're going to go back to Chicago. We have a concert also in August. Anyway, you can look at our website, CatholicArtInstitute.org events. Thank you. I'm sorry for plugging, but it does help. And I really appreciate you having me on. This has been really enjoyable conversation. So thanks.
Absolutely. You're welcome. You're welcome to plug. And while we're plugging, let me go ahead and do that. To all of our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for joining us today. Please do be sure to rate and review us. Share this episode with a friend so we can continue to bring you these great conversations. Check out our website at spacesalviinstitute.com. Join our email list so you don't miss any of our articles, podcasts, or any announcements that we have coming forward. Until next time, God bless and live in hope.